on your mobile phone and on all social media platforms. Jambo Radio.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome again to another episode of Positive Health Hour on Jambo Radio. Positive Health Hour, for anyone who's been listening in the last couple of months, is our informational show talking about HIV and sexual health and how it relates to overall health and well-being of people from Black and African communities living in Scotland. The show is sponsored by Waverley Care, and Waverley Care is a charity in Scotland. We work out of Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Inverness, but we work across Scotland. What we do is we provide information to people who want to know more about their sexual health, about HIV, and about hepatitis. Just to advise people on what these things mean. If people want to get tested or they want to, go to the clinics to get some more information or to get some more of the healthcare services, we also encourage and help them into doing that, whilst we also do testing. Something else we do is we also give direct support to people living with HIV and hepatitis. So, if people need, support around managing their health condition or other parts of their lives, that they want to be able to have someone to just guide them through, housing information, immigration advice, information on benefits and, going through those processes, things like that. We also provide all of that information. We have a specific service in Glasgow, Greater Glasgow and Clyde and Lanarkshire, which is dedicated to working with African communities primarily. So that's more of that's the branch of the organization that is run by people from African communities who understand, a little bit more about the experiences of other people like ourselves. You can find more information about us. You can get in touch with Waverley Care at www.waverleycare.org. Waverley Care is spelled as WAVERLEY. That's Waverley, and Care, CARE. So that's WAVERLEYCARE. Waverley Care, www.waverleycare.org. Today, unfortunately, we're not going to be getting as many phone-ins, question times as possible. But you know what? I'm going to be dropping a number where anyone who has any questions can either send a text or a WhatsApp, or even give us a call. And the number is a Waverley Care number where you'll be able to speak directly to a Waverley Care staff who can answer your questions, going forward. The number is 077 190 43744. I'll repeat that again, 077 190 43744. So you can get in touch with that number between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday. Ask your questions, drop any comments, or just, if you want to know more about the things we're discussing today and about Waverley Care. We're also going to be touching on a few sensitive topics, a few sensitive subjects, emotionally sensitive subjects, talking a little bit about some mental health difficulties and things like that. So please be aware of that whilst you're listening. And if you need to tune out for a little bit, to recompose yourself, definitely do that. But also, if you need any more support and advice on any of the difficult things we talk about, get in touch with the number I've mentioned. So today we're talking about HIV and young people from African communities. We've talked about HIV on this show for the last about 6 months now. Talking about what HIV is, what HIV stigma is, preventing HIV, things like that. But now we're going to tailor it to one specific angle of our community, which is young people. And we have, someone here with us today. She is a young person, and she is a very energetic one for that matter. And I'm just going to ask our guest to introduce yourself. So please tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, Ese. Thanks for having me. My name's Rose. I'm from Namibia. And I've been in Glasgow now for about 9 months.
And where did you move from before moving to Glasgow?
Well, my journey is very long. I lived in India before moving to Glasgow. So, yeah.
And that's very interesting. I've never been to India, but I can imagine that must have been a different experience from Zambia. From Namibia.
Yeah.
And also a different experience from Glasgow. So what's it been like transitioning from Africa to Asia to Europe?
Total culture shock, but it was an experience with a lot of learning blocks, and I appreciate that experience. I've met a lot of people along the way. I've grown in many, many ways, and yeah, basically. It was needed. Exciting. Indeed.
Hopefully you can share some of that knowledge and experience that you've gained over the course of transitioning. We are here today on radio, and just very interestingly, you were talking about, you used to do some work in radio back in Namibia, but also thinking, what other hobbies, what other interests do you have?
Well, funny enough, I love watching crime docuseries.
Okay.
Maybe this has something to do with my psychology background, but it just gives me so much pleasure watching murder shows, and how to clean up blood and how to get rid of evidence. Those are my type of things that I do on a regular. Other than that, the usual hanging out with friends, social being. I'm a social butterfly, and just learning from people. Actually, that's something I like doing.
Interesting. It's like all your interests align to understanding people more.
Yes.
That's cool. We're talking about HIV today, focusing on an angle that is very interesting to both of us, from our conversations. But just when did you first come to know, about HIV?
Wow. Being from sub-Saharan Africa, and this is the line that I always start with, but I was exposed to this HIV and AIDS from a young age. But I would say at the age of 8, from 8, 9, that's when I actually knew like what it was, because it started being on TV. There was break the chain adverts. There were things like adverts of people going to buy condoms and such things on TV. So our government really exposed us in the tender ages. Plus, we had sexual education classes in primary school already. So we were exposed to things like HIV and AIDS, condoms, and every other thing that was available at the time.
And that's so you kind of already grew up with HIV information and how to prevent HIV and things like that.
Exactly.
In the mix of that, I presume there's there's going to have been different impact of all of knowing about HIV and all of that information. So what would you say kind of has been the impact of HIV on yourself? Either directly or indirectly till today.
All right. So at the tender age, I didn't really quite know that I would encounter a direct impact, as in like maybe family members or people close to me, because we grew up in that community of you don't say anything, or only adults can speak about certain things. But as I grew into a young adult and as I grew into a teenager, I began to understand that it is affecting each and every home, and it also affected my home, whether it was extended family or whether it was friends of people that I knew close to me that were living with HIV and AIDS at the time. So the experiences only came later as I grew to understand what HIV is, and it was no more the virus of, that person has that deadly thing, So it was now a thing of, this person is living with HIV and this is what it is. When I grew up to be a young adult, a teenager,
Interesting. So you kind of have transitioned from when HIV was not spoken about to when HIV was spoken about, but as a thing of, that person is doomed. Up until now, it's like, this person is living with HIV and this is how their life is actually able to keep going forward.
That's right.
And we're going to be looking deeper into the journey of HIV up until today, because a lot has changed. And anyone who's listened to our previous shows, you must have heard some of the information about how HIV is a lot manageable now. So that's one experience. Thankfully, we're able to ask a few young people about their experiences and knowledge of HIV as well. Just a few young people around Glasgow, just see where their knowledge stands, in comparison. So just now, we're going to play the interviews with these young people. It's about a 10-minute one, so just sit back, relax, and listen. So just thinking, as a young person, an African young person, what comes to your mind when you hear about HIV today?
Well, HIV is a condition Yeah, but it's not as terrible as it was before because it is well managed now. Before people thought, oh, you have HIV, I'm dead, and all of that. But right now, people are managing it, they're living through it for quite a long time. So, yes, unfortunately, it is gotten, but it could be managed. It is like, I always think like HIV is from sex, unprotected sex. Yeah, even though I know that it can come from sharp objects or any other means, maybe sharing, maybe clippers or whatever. But majorly, it just feels like it comes from sex. And I also feel like people don't really talk about it anymore as it used to be before. Like people have just moved on from it. We don't really know, is it still in existence? Are people still getting it? And I think maybe there are ways to manage it, but really I don't hear about it anymore.
HIV, what comes to my mind is actually not really just a sexually transmitted infection, but I mean, that's what I used to think. But now it's broad. I've come to understand there are other means of transmission. But I mean, rewind 5, 10, no, 10, 15 years ago, I used to think it's just sexually transmitted. But now it's just, I mean, I have a broader view of HIV as something you can get by maybe probably sharing shops, sexual transmission and all of that. So that's what comes to mind. And also, what comes to mind as well is that today, HIV, a diagnosis of HIV doesn't mean the end of one's life. I mean, there have been medical breakthroughs. So yeah, that's basically in a nutshell what I think HIV is.
So do you know what U equals U stands for?
U equals U. I've not heard it before.
Yeah.
U equals U. No, sorry, I don't.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Like, so U equals U means undetectable equals untransmittable.
Yeah,
so it's just one of those acronyms, and you've said it. There's medication that help people to live well with HIV nowadays. All of the medical advancements. So the way we describe that, if someone is living with HIV and on their medication, once they achieve this U equals U status, it means that they can pass the virus on to someone else, even if they don't use a condom for sex, and also their life expectancy is significantly improved because the virus is not destroying their immune system as it would do if there was no medicine. Next question is, do you know about PrEP and what it does?
PrEP?
Yeah.
No.
I do. I do know that PrEP is the pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Yeah.
Yes, and I also know there's PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. So I get PrEP is probably what prophylaxis taken by someone that might think they've been exposed to the virus, probably in the last 48 hours. So that's what PrEP is. It helps to a very significant level prevent or reduce their chances of probably catching the virus. So that's PrEP. Then PEP as well. So yeah, PrEP is before exposure and PEP is after exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It's like they just prevent someone from contracting the virus if they're exposed to it. And if you don't mind me asking, like, how did you hear about PrEP? How long ago have you known about it?
Known about PrEP? Well, 5-7 years now. Yes. I first heard of PrEP because my brother is in the medical line, so I first heard of PrEP from him, and I read about it, and after a few months I got to know about PEP as well.
Okay.
Yeah, because in his line of duty, I think he got scratched by a sharp. So he had to take the PEP.
So the next question is, what will be your reaction if a friend or family comes to you saying that they have been diagnosed with HIV? And it doesn't have to be your reaction to them. It might be your reaction internally. What would your reaction be?
Well, I'll feel sad, of course. Having any kind of condition is definitely not good, but of course there'll be hope that it can be managed. Don't feel too bad, Yeah, just giving support, basically. Yeah.
And do you think as a young person you have a role to play, or as young people generally, we have a role to play to improve the knowledge about HIV and what it is to live with HIV today? And if so, why or how do you think that should be done?
Yeah, of course. We are vibrant. We are we have this pool of knowledge, to access to different resources. So definitely it's up to us to make that awareness spread far and wide, especially to the older folks who have this stereotype
Yeah.
view about HIV and other conditions. So yeah, it's up to us to make this known that HIV is manageable. It's not a cast on stone thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's up to us. And thank God we have social media. We have the internet. It's a very powerful tool. Yeah, we have the radio, different media tools. Yeah, just to reach out to people.
Exactly.
My reaction, first of all, definitely I'll panic because I know HIV is not curable. Even though there are drugs that can manage it for a lifetime, but the fear of having to take drugs every day of your life is disheartening. So if someone comes to me already, I'm like, okay, so you had unprotected sex, I'm already judging you, that sort of thing. Really, I think, but I'm just gonna respect you, but I'll try not to like expose information to other people. And really, I think I'll just have to I'll feel really bad. I'll feel terrible. Why did you have to do this to yourself? And just maybe scold you about it. But I mean, it can happen to anybody. So my first point is just to really feel bad about it and really judge you in my head, even though I may not say it to you.
And as young people, based on like who we are in terms of generally just young people of African heritage, do you think we have a role to play in order to reduce or tackle HIV stigma and improve the knowledge about it? And if so, how do you think we can do this?
Well, I think we just really have to accept that HIV is just one of those viruses that we have to live with or deal with. Nobody really likes any virus, be it COVID-19, be it whatever. So HIV is one of those things. So if anybody comes in contact with it or is affected or infected by it, just a part of life. You need to learn to accept them, that just like having any form of disease, you can have stroke, you can be blind, it's just anything that can happen to anybody.
Maybe a friend or family came to you today to say they've been diagnosed with HIV. What would be your initial reaction? And it doesn't have to be the reaction to them, it can be also the reaction in words, whichever you want.
Oh, well, first of all, I mean, just like I said earlier, rewind 10 years ago, I would have been judgmental. How do you have this? But right now, I wouldn't be. My reaction would just be seek medical help. I do know about the CD4 count. Yeah, try as much as possible to seek medication to probably suppress your viral load. I mean, that would be my reaction. That would be my advice as of today. Yeah, I wouldn't be judgmental. I'll just. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll advise them to go for seek medical advice and get better.
Thank you. And just the last question. So, as a young person, especially as a young African person, do you think we have a responsibility to challenge the stigma around HIV and to improve the knowledge? And if we do, how do you think we should go about it?
Yeah, of course, because not everybody, I'm aware that not everybody is quite privileged to have the updated knowledge around HIV. So I think it's our responsibility to try as much as possible, as much as we can, to educate as much as we can, to pass information as much as we can to further reduce the stigma. Because I think stigma is one of the reasons why people don't even go for medical what do you call it? Going for tests. I think that's one of the reasons why people don't do it, because of the stigma. Okay, what if it's positive? I mean, people are going to see me as probably in quotes promiscuous, in quotes infected. So yeah, I think we owe that as a duty to the African society and to the society at large to reduce the stigma surrounding HIV. And one way of doing that is, just like what you're doing, like the more you know, the more you pass information, the more people get to know. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that. Very interesting takes on three young people's views around HIV and how how they would relate to people living with HIV. Just a few things to wrap up those videos before we go on a quick break. Beginning of this show, I think we talked about how HIV can be transmitted, but just to reiterate again, HIV can only be transmitted through blood, through semen, through vaginal fluid, through anal mucus, and breast milk. So those are the only 5 bodily fluids through which HIV can be transmitted. So the blood, semen, vaginal fluid, anal mucus, and breast milk. And the way it's transmitted is through condomless sex with between someone who is HIV positive or living with HIV, but they're not on their medication, they've not attained, suppression of the virus, so that it can transmit from that person to someone who is HIV negative if they have sex without a condom, and that can be anal or vaginal sex. Also, it can be transmitted mother to child through breastfeeding, and also it can be transmitted through sharing of drug injecting equipment, so sharing the same needle and syringe between someone who has the virus again and someone else who is HIV negative. So those are the only ways through which HIV can be transmitted, which means some of the misinformation about HIV being transmitted through toilets, through sharing cutlery, through sharing clippers, or through sharing toothbrush, all of that is exactly it's wrong information. But also, just like I said in the video, U equals U is when someone living with HIV takes their HIV medication as prescribed by the clinic, the sexual health and HIV clinic. And then once they start taking their medication regularly, as they are told to, the virus keeps reducing and reducing until a level where it gets to that even if they have sex with someone without a condom, they can transmit the virus. And usually, you might ask, how would someone know when they've reached that level? When you're taking your medication, someone who is living with HIV, you have regular checkups at the clinic, and the doctor will let you know, or the nurse will let you know when you've reached that undetectable status. And so U equals U means undetectable, means untransmittable. So once you reach that level where the virus is very reduced in the blood, it means you cannot transmit it to someone else. But also the good thing is about that is it means the virus is at a controllable level where it's not negatively affecting the person living with HIV. So the person is not going to keep disintegrating in terms of their immune system the way it was at the beginning of when AIDS was still when there was no medication and people developed AIDS and things like that. PrEP and PEP. We've talked about PrEP and PEP on the show. PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. It is a medication or a drug that prevents people from getting HIV before they get exposed. So before they maybe have sex with someone who is HIV positive and not on their medicines, or the way we've talked about how HIV can be transmitted. This stops them from getting the virus before they've been exposed to it. So it's like some people take it daily, some people take it around the time when they might have sex, just to protect themselves. For women, they can only take it daily just because that's how it works in their bodies as well. PEP is similar to PrEP, but that serves to stop the virus from taking hold in the body if someone has already been exposed to HIV and they were not taking PrEP before. So PEP stops it, and they need to make sure they take PEP between the first 3 days, between the first 72 hours. They need to start it. All of these medicines are free from the sexual health clinics. For PEP, you can also get it from the A&E, accident and emergency. If it's maybe at the weekend and the sexual health clinic is not open, the A&E, and even in some areas, some GPs provide PrEP and PEP, especially when you go up north in Scotland. And the reality of living with HIV today, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. But the one thing I would just like to drop is there is no fear and there should be no judgment. We'll expound more on that. For now, we're going to have a quick break, listen to some nice tunes, and then when we come back, we're going to open the floor for our guest, Rose, to dive deep into the things we'll be discussing today. So sit back and relax, and we'll see you in 5 minutes.
they waste my time. I don't wanna wait till it's all over. This life is a gift from the Most High Jah. That is why I'm thankful for all I have. Cause the fast life really ain't all that. So now I try to be pure of heart. No be like say I know this shit no man. I just get better in Jah. Waiting and see for this life plenty. I keep on for my belly. Roller coaster. People be like any roller coaster. My life now. Roller coaster. Let go. Don't worry. Don't worry. Sample again. Shoot back back.
Como todo sube, también baja. Pero la vida me protege de las malas. A veces creo que yo soy la hierba mala. Porque no muero aunque me tire muchas balas. Y que me duela para recordar que estoy vivo. Que me la gozo pero también la he sufrido. Que ni la fama ni la lana me calman el frío. Y la sonrisa de mi hijo me quita el escalofrío. De mis emociones, muchas palabras pero pocas las acciones. Ya no vivo pendiente de las opiniones. Ya me resbala, solo quiero hacer canciones. De mis emociones, muchas palabras pero pocas las acciones. Ya no vivo pendiente de las opiniones. Ya me resbala, solo quiero hacer canciones. Dímelo si sientes que te ofendí. No siempre puedo estar feliz. Hacer la cosa. La gente está encima de mí. Toda cosa. Si arriba estás, roller coaster.
I don't want to you today waste my time. This life is a gift from the Most High Jah. That is why I'm thankful for all I have.
On your mobile phone and on all social media platforms. Jambo Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for listening in so far. Can't believe we're already halfway through the hour. But if you're just joining us, you are listening to Positive Health Hour. Positive Health Hour focuses on people from Black African communities living in Scotland, improving our health, receiving positive health outcomes, but with an especial focus on HIV, because in the end, contrary to what many people believe, it is still something that affects our community, and affects our community slightly more than it should, and slightly more than, our white counterparts in Scotland. So we need to make sure we focus on this. Waverley Care is the one sponsoring the show. Waverley Care is a sexual health charity in Scotland, and we provide advice, information, and support. You can find us at www.waverleycare.org, or you can just easily Google us, Waverley Care. We stand out. And you can also drop in messages by WhatsApp or text or by phone call to a dedicated Waverley Care line, which is 077 190 43744. Again, 077 190 43744. So if you want to ask any questions about what you've listened to today, or any more questions, or just getting in touch, you can do that through our website or through that number. Now we're going to have our amazing guest Rose, who is here with us, going to be dissecting some of the issues about whether where young people's responsibilities lie when it comes to HIV awareness and challenging stigma. So I would just like to ask you, Rose, you've talked about your experience of HIV from, the age of 8 up until today, and we've listened to some interviews from some other young people in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. But what do you think the majority of young people, if you were to generalize, where would you say the knowledge of young people and their attitudes towards HIV, where would you say that is today?
Wow. You know, funny enough, there's been a shift in the attitude of young people with other things, but with HIV and AIDS, it's still sort of stagnant. Like there's sort of like a complex or a syndrome that they believe like you only live once. So most of the time they don't think about it unless they are directly affected by it. For example, if I'm negative, you're negative, let's go by it. You understand? So until you're positive, that's when they say, oh no, it really got real. I have it now. So young people are still naive about this. They are still not trying to get into the conversations. I don't blame them to a certain degree, because it's the communities where we grew up in that made it seem like you can't talk about this. So this conversation becomes heavy to have, even as you grow into a young adult and you venture out into the world alone.
Yeah.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, young people are at 4 with this HIV thing. Some really know, those that are considered woke, but others don't.
Our woke people out there, your Rose seems to be channeling you today. But yeah, I like something you said at the beginning. You said young people can sometimes say things like, oh, you only live once, and you know, in that vein, take, or maybe not take at all. It's like disregard HIV, you know. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, you know, how does that play out?
Most of the time when we engage in sexual activity, and this is from my immediate circles and people that I know in my own point of view, most of the time when we engage in sexual activity, all we think about, for example, women, is pregnancy. We try to protect ourselves from pregnancy instead of protecting ourselves from STIs or HIV in this regard. Now, people take all the necessary measures, getting implants, getting the coil, to protect themselves from reproduction, but they do not take the necessary precautions to say, like, I'm not going to be having unprotected sex with this person, whether I know his status or not. So it's sort of like a thing of someone convinces you, or your partner convinces you, and this is for straight people, that I'm allergic to latex, or it just doesn't feel the same with a condom on, and it just starts like that, and you have it once without a condom, and you keep forgetting to make a mental note that, okay, let's use protection. It starts from the little things, like just being too reluctant to use protection. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? It's like there is, thankfully now, condom is not the only way to prevent HIV now. We have PrEP and PEP, which we talked about earlier. But, you know, like we said previous shows, PrEP does not stop other sexually transmitted infections. So that always still comes back to wrap it, wear a condom, you know. And if someone has latex allergy, thankfully there's latex-free condoms out there. It's like there's an option for everyone, you know. Even we joke about it sometimes, and we even say, because other sexually transmitted infections apart from HIV, you know, can also be transmitted from oral sex. And we say to people, you know, you can have oral sex with a condom, and you know, some people say, oh, I don't like that taste, and we say there's flavored condoms, so you can choose if you want to taste like strawberry, you want to taste like, but so you know, it's about that thing of having options, about protection. And I like what you said, you know, it's like there's such a focus on preventing unplanned pregnancies, you know, and it's become almost second nature to go for a coil or go for the implant. But we don't give that same attention to preventing HIV, you know. And would you, in your own sort of opinion, would you say, based on how HIV started and from what you talked about, you know, at the beginning when you first found out about HIV, what have been people's attitudes towards other people living with HIV?
Wow. As the generations go on, I feel like there's a shift, but the shift is not an acceptance shift. It's an let's accommodate shift. Yeah, it's not like, okay, we accept you, we separate you from the virus. You are Rose, the virus is the virus. It's sort of like, if we don't accept her, you know, she's our family, she's our friend, what will we do? Let's just hold on to that. Growing up, it was very different. When I started to realize that HIV was living in my immediate surroundings, or with some family members close to me and those extended to me, I didn't understand that the people who were not living with HIV, how they were treating the ones living with HIV at that time. I couldn't fathom why we would be isolated from a certain auntie or a certain uncle, or why we couldn't visit their house. Only later as I grew, that's when I understood, like, oh, that was actually the problem there. Because our older generation didn't understand that we could go have a cup of tea with this person, juice with this person, and leave that house totally negative. So that's it's not acceptance, it's just accommodating.
Yeah. And that's very interesting, because a lot of people living with HIV today, especially with the medication that is available, the advancement in HIV treatment, they say things like, I don't want your pity. You know, some people say things like, I don't want your pity. I don't need you to pity me when I tell you about my HIV status. Like, I want you to accept me, not accommodate me. You know, it's like, oh, we don't want to shun you because you are a friend, or but it's like, that's probably maybe not the right response. It's, oh, you are living with HIV. Oh, interesting. But, you know, the response is not a response of pity, because as someone living with HIV, I really don't need anyone's pity. Because I don't really, it doesn't impact my life as...
Or what you do.
You know, exactly. Like, yes, there's people who struggle with living with HIV, and everyone is an individual. People respond differently. But I guess that's a very interesting point, you know. Accommodating someone is probably not the easiest or the best response to someone, you know, saying, oh, I'm living with HIV. You've said a lot about, you know, growing up in sub-Saharan Africa, and how HIV was mostly a thing for the adults to think about or to talk about, or to young people were kind of removed from that subject. But, you know, we're living in Scotland today. We're living in a different society from what myself and yourself grew up in. I grew up in Nigeria myself, and it's, you know, quite similar. So it's like, and now we are kind of our own adults, because we're young people, but we are responsible for ourselves. We're raising ourselves in a different land, in a different place. So what would you know, if you're thinking about it, you know, saying, oh, there's sometimes people don't have the right knowledge around HIV, what happens? What does that actually look like in real life when someone doesn't have the right knowledge about HIV, or they don't have the right attitude towards people living with HIV? Like, do you have any examples that explain that impact on the people living with HIV?
Okay, so it's really bad for when there's not enough knowledge or understanding about a certain thing, because I'll start with here. I had an encounter with somebody that asked me, oh, I saw you went to an event, an HIV event. What are you doing there? I had explained to them, and they were like, I didn't know there was or the people, like African community, they lived with HIV here. I was like, you would be so surprised. Why don't you know that? It's because you don't inquire it, because it has not affected you. All right. Now, the thing is, with back home, once someone is affected, the stigmatization starts from those that know. And this makes the person living with HIV feel isolated. So the emotional aspect behind this thing drives this person into thinking of their self-image, like thinking of their self-worth, like, what's the point of me living? Many cases back then, now that I'm piecing everything together, many cases were suicide. And there's a direct link to this as well. I had an uncle who hung himself. He was a military guy. And you know, military men have to put up this front, like, yeah. And when he found out about his HIV status, he came home one day, he left his bag, and from there he just disappeared. People found him hung by a tree, and it was only later discovered that it was because of his HIV status. Now, we don't know whether he got this from having a heterosexual relationship or whether it was a gay relationship. We don't know. But he just couldn't bear to face that stigmatization from his family, the discrimination, and having that negative self-image on himself. This also leads to people not going to take their medication. Many a times in my hometown, the mine workers would not want to go and get their medication. They would tell the nurses to give it to them after hours, because they wouldn't want to line up and people see them that, oh, they are at the HIV or the ARV section. So this made the government incorporate the whole thing, so that when you come into the hospital, nobody knows what you're coming to do there. also the lack of understanding from friends and family makes them not want to like ever tell them their HIV status, because your family doesn't understand HIV and what it incorporates, or what HIV is and how HIV is evolving over the years. You are not going to tell them. You are not even going to be bothered for the healthcare worker or the clinician to explain to you like, oh, there's this, there's that. You're not going to be bothered, because at the end of the day, your family says you're dying. You're dying. Also, bullying and violence, physical violence from people around them. You know, there's a lady who I call the face of HIV from Namibia. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but her name's Emma. In 1996, she was the first lady who declared herself as someone living with HIV. And everybody in the country was like, oh my God, what is she doing? But if you see that lady today, she looks just like me, as plumpy, as healthy, just like me. So there's no way I'll be able to tell that she has HIV. The only reason I know that is because she publicly said it, and she publicly advocates for taking ARVs and medication. But what about the person whose family has isolated them and shunned them and they don't take their medication? And
that's the thing, isn't it? It's like when someone discloses to you that they are living with HIV, you know, first of all, they've taken the step to tell you something that they know could potentially cause a broken relationship, because you know, just like you said, different people react to HIV differently. Some people know all about it. They know all about, you know, how HIV is managed today. They know how it's transmitted. If someone tells them they're HIV positive, they're just like, oh, I'm sorry you have to deal with that, but I'm also glad that, you know, you are able to manage it going forward and it's not going to impact you, while some others can, you know, ostracize people, isolate them. And especially as you know, Africans, we grow up thinking community is the place where we fit in. Like, no matter no matter what happens in the world, your community is there, and so you're safe. But if someone gets left out of that community, or if someone gets pushed out because of the stigma that people can still have, it leads to, you know, the things you've said. Someone, unfortunately, you know, committing suicide, taking their life because they don't feel like their community accepts them again. And that's the real life impact of not knowing enough about HIV, or not, you know, or judging people living with HIV, or, you know, being negative towards them in our attitudes and in how we treat them going forward. And that's quite sad. True. Looking at young people now, because we know as young people we are vibrant, we are, you know, always taking the next step towards, you know, our elders say things like we always pretend that we know more. And, you know, sometimes we pretend that we know more, that we know more than our adults or our elders. But also sometimes, because of our position, we have a lot more current information, you know, about how the world works today. Exactly. More exposure. But what's your opinion on young people's communication about HIV? Because we there's maybe pockets of us that know more, like you said, those who are woke. There's probably people who do not know more. There's people who know half of the information that they don't know it fully. So it's like, what do you think is what's your opinion on young people and how they communicate about HIV and sexual health within relationships?
Young people's communication about HIV, sex, and sexual whatever preferences is really bad. It's below the mark, the threshold, because young people do not really know how to express themselves. And I don't know if this comes from a lack of knowledge or understanding about certain things, because we don't really dive deep into things that don't concern us. So if young people would be able to talk about HIV and sex and everything that entails to a sexual relationship the way they spoke about, let's say, Davido cheating on Chioma, for example, we would. We're
not talking about that. That part is not going on air today.
We would definitely have a young group of young people that has gotten to zero. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because the information would be out there, and the relationships, the communication in the relationships would be better. Prevention methods would be discussed without even flinching. But this all drives back from the thing of the community not letting you talk about it. So whether you come to Scotland, whether you go to Spain, whether you are in the US, there's still going to be things of not wanting to talk about it or not being able to talk about it because you hear that thing of don't talk about it. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? It's like, yes, there's people from, of African heritage who are Scottish by all right. They were born here. This is home. And there's also people of African heritage who have migrated here, whether first generation, second, whatever generation we want to, the rest of the world likes to put generation and titles before our identity. It's like we're human beings, but that's a different topic of conversation. But it's like, your mindset and your belief system comes not just from where you live, but from your background, your family, your community, and unfortunately, it's still very much so that within our community as Africans, we don't talk as much about HIV as we should, even though it affects us, sometimes a little bit more than it affects, our white counterparts. I was saying, some of the data we have from last 2019, shows that people diagnosed late with HIV, which, it should not be a thing anymore because now if you're diagnosed, you take your medication, you get back, hopefully bounce back on your health, but people who were diagnosed late, there was a higher percentage of them being from Black African communities. And that should not be, especially if we have all of this, prevention, but also the management tools at our disposal. But as young people, we should take up that responsibility. Yes, we might have been told you should not talk about it, but in the end, people say ignorance is bliss, but is it really bliss? Is ignorance really bliss if you are putting yourself at risk and you're not taking enough measures to protect yourself and to protect other people as well? This is something you talked about, when we were discussing before coming on. Protect yourself to protect me.
Yeah, that's my slogan.
Yeah.
That's my slogan. With young people, it's like, how they say prevention is better than cure? With young people, it's like, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So if I do find out that I'm positive, I'll know what to do by then. But now let's live la vida loca. Let's just live. But my slogan has always been, protect yourself to protect me. And now that when I got here and I got in touch with Waverly Care, I understood that actually means you equals you. So yeah.
And that's interesting. It's like, regardless of how it's phrased, it's the same notion, it's the same reasoning behind it. I always tell people, whenever people say, oh, please share your experience of living with HIV, I always say, I'm grateful that all of the things we have today, the medication we have today, I take 2 tablets every morning. Some people take 1 tablet, different depending on who it is. But I take that tablet every morning when I'm brushing my teeth, take that, and I go about my day. I don't get, the HIV itself doesn't really affect me. Once every 6 months, I go to the clinic to get checkup and all of that. Just to make sure that the virus is still maintaining that controlled level. But I always tell people that's all well and good. So in all reality, I am living a very good life.
Yeah.
I am healthy. I am happy. But sometimes, I still think to myself, what? I wish I never had this in the first place. I wish I didn't have to wake up every morning to take my tablet to show up every 6 months to have my blood. And since I was born, I've always hated syringes. But now it's funny because for the rest of my life, I have to deal with a syringe in my hand once every 6 months. And those are the kinds of things that make me think, I wish I just didn't have HIV in the first place, So it's like, people say we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Oh, there's medicines now, so there's no. But we still should not, it's like, limit as much of the health conditions you
take.
Next month hopefully we'll be talking about aging with HIV, and when you look at HIV and aging, when people are growing older, looking at how HIV impacts on them, with all of the different things that come with aging, and that should be an interesting topic of conversation. But communication is key, because without that, obviously you feel vulnerable in your relationships. You don't feel able to talk about condom use and PrEP. It's like, some people say, I mentioned I'm taking PrEP with my partner, and they flared up in anger, and then they're like, but we've only just started seeing each other, we're not yet committed. That's why I'm taking PrEP, because I don't want to just put myself and yourself and you at risk. So it's not a blame game, it's a I'm looking after myself to look after you, and you should look after yourself to look after me.
That's it, period.
Yeah, but we should also be able to talk about it freely, because until we're able to talk about things around HIV, surrounding HIV, and until we're able to talk about it freely, that stigma will still stay, and people will be too scared. And, you know, the more you're scared of something, the worse it gets in your mind, the bigger it gets. You know, if you're afraid, I can't remember the exact saying now, but the demon only becomes bigger if you keep being afraid about it. It becomes more powerful if you keep being afraid about it. So how do you think young people can do better in promoting HIV information, but also making sure that people, sadly, like your uncle, don't think suicide is the only way out?
The only way out.
You know, how do you think young people can take up that responsibility of promoting good information and challenging HIV stigma?
Okay, so firstly, to commit suicide, you have to be very strong. That's one thing I always say. You are the strongest person in the room, because it's not for the weak. Now, getting back to the question, young people need to get educated. That's one. Learn the basic and the latest info, or the latest facts about HIV and transmission and everything around it. And when I say around it, it's like there are other things that affect or that impact, or that's the English word, but there are other things around HIV that if you don't know, you'll slip up and say the wrong thing, or be in the wrong place at the wrong time with somebody living with HIV. And then get regular testing. I know mostly I'm going to refer to men from my country. They always say, what are you going to do at the New Start Center? That's a center that tests for HIV. What you're looking for, one day you'll get it. That's what they always say. Because they try to tell you, don't get tested. So learn the prevention methods. Every day there's a new thing. There's a new way, there's a new this, there's a new that. Get updated with prevention methods. And the number one thing is get talking. How do you get talking? You attend events, either by Waverly Care or by other organizations that talk about HIV and AIDS, and sit in the room where they're discussing these issues and realize that it's okay to be there. Secondly, you show support to people who are living with HIV and AIDS by actually educating yourself on how to give support. What support do they need, you know? And then this one, lastly, is for people living with HIV and AIDS to share their stories. Because some people like me, I learn by people's mistakes or by things that happen to people. That's how I learn. If you had burned while playing with fire, that's how I know that fire is dangerous, because I would be like, in order to avoid this is what I need to do when you say it. So people living with HIV should also be comfortable enough to share their stories with us or with people not living with HIV. And yeah,
it's like a back and forth thing, isn't it? You know, if people know more about HIV, they stigmatize HIV less, they talk about it freely, they get tested freely. If someone ends up testing positive for HIV, they don't feel ostracized and ashamed, because they know that their community understands enough about it to embrace them still, you know. And it's like back and forth, that kind of influences a cycle of us, you know, just living better lives as a community and promoting our own health. Because you might think, it's just one person that has HIV, but if that one person doesn't take their medication and they sleep with 10 other people, they can transmit it to 10 other people, and 10 other people transmit. And also, if one person knows the right information about HIV and is not stigmatizing or judging people living with HIV, and they exhibit that towards one person, that one person exhibit that towards 10 people, 10 people, it's
goes a long way.
Exactly, it's a ripple effect. And, you know, just to reiterate, you know, HIV is not what it used to be when it was first discovered. Now, anyone who tests positive for HIV, hopefully they are tested as quickly as, you know, soon enough to when they've contracted or contacted HIV. They go on their medication, they get to undetectable status, they don't pass it on. Their life expectancy, you know, is significantly like improved, almost even as anyone without HIV. And it means they don't even have to, like, AIDS becomes an impossibility, because AIDS only arrives when someone is not taking their medication, and it becomes so sick that they get other things like cancer or something like
TB.
So it's like now it's like AIDS it's a very much of, you know, something we can say, that's not even a thing anymore. Unfortunately, some people still get to that point because they don't get tested, they don't find out about their HIV status, they don't take their medications because they are too ashamed to go to the clinic, or different reasons. And the point is, let us all arm ourselves with information, but also arm ourselves with love and kindness and understanding. Anyone who is interested in learning more about HIV, but also understanding more about how to talk about HIV within your community, or to your friends, to your relations, to your family, it's like, I want to talk about it, but I don't know how to bring it up. Thankfully, Waverly Care, we are running this project over the next year, where we are going to help improve the skills and the knowledge of people who want to be in that position to say, I want to pass on that good information about HIV. We're going to be calling, it's going to be hopefully called something like, influencing positive health. So anyone who wants to get involved with that, who wants to do that, please get in touch with Waverly Care. The website is www.waverleycare.org, www.waverleycare.org, and we can work on that together and see how we can improve the lives, and health and well-being of our community together. Thank you very much for coming on, Rose. It's been amazing having you. Hopefully we have you back again another time. And for everyone out there, have a lovely afternoon. Enjoy the sun that has come and is shining out today after all that rain. And we will catch you again next month. We are on the second Thursday of every month between 2 and 3 p.m. and we'll see you all. Bye-bye.